She fell to her knees in front of everyone. Then one human stepped forward. The plaza was full, crowds packed every corner. Some whispered, some laughed, some just stared. At the center, under the pale sun of Valaris Prime, stood a young alien woman. Her robes were torn, her knees were bloody, her eyes locked on the stone beneath her. Her name was Valari Tisen, once the daughter of a respected house. Now, she was nothing. Stripped of title, accused of speaking too boldly. All because she questioned a council elder, an old man who sent poor children into dangerous work zones while his family grew rich. And so she was punished, shamed, publicly. They made her kneel in the circle of obedience, in front of the fountain, where her mother once told stories of justice. She could barely breathe. But no one moved. Not one citizen, not one elder, not one friend, until a man in plain gray cloth stepped through the crowd. He was human. Broad shoulders, calloused hands, short, brown hair. A work pass hung from his belt. Jonas Cade, off-world laborer, dock mechanic, temporary staff. He didn't understand the language fully, but he understood the moment, and it made his blood boil. He walked forward slowly, 1 step, 2 steps. The guards didn't stop him. They didn't expect a human to interfere. He stopped, just 2 feet away from her. Valari Tisen lifted her head, just slightly. Their eyes met, and he said in a calm, steady voice, "If no one else will stand for her, then I will." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One of the elders stepped forward. "You. We'll leave now, outsider." Jonas didn't move. "She did nothing wrong," he said. "You do not speak our laws," the elder snapped. Jonas looked at Valari. "She spoke truth. You punished her for it." The elder's face darkened. Guards approached. Valari whispered, "Please go, you'll be hurt." But Jonas only said, "You're already hurt, that's enough for today." A guard grabbed his arm. He didn't resist, but he didn't step away either. "By touching her, you dishonor our judgment," the elder barked. Jonas turned his head. "I'm not touching your judgment. I'm stopping your cruelty." The guards raised their staves, but the crowd had changed. They didn't laugh now. They didn't whisper. They watched. Some looked down, ashamed. Others stared, frozen. And one old woman in the back crossed her arms and muttered. "About time," someone said. "It." Valari stood slowly. Her legs shook. Jonas stepped beside her, offering his arm. She didn't take it. But she didn't fall either. She said nothing, but the look in her eyes said everything. "Thank you. I see you. You saw me." The elders hissed among themselves. "Take him," one ordered. "Remove him from our city." Jonas raised his voice, not loud but steady. "Go ahead, kick me out. But everyone here saw what you did, and maybe one day they'll stop looking away too." Then he turned to Valari and nodded, and walked out of the circle alone. No guards followed. They didn't need to. The moment had already happened. The silence had already broken. That night Valari sat alone in her quarters, stripped, cold, forgotten. But her hands still trembled from something new. Not fear, not shame, hope. Because one man, a stranger, had stood for her when her own world stepped aside. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled. He didn't know her name, but he knew what was right. Jonas Cade sat alone on the edge of the shipping yard wall, watching the sun dip behind the towers of Valaris Prime. He still didn't know her name, didn't know what family she came from, didn't know what words they had used to shame her. All he knew was what he saw. A girl on her knees, and a city that stood still. That was enough. More than enough. "Are you crazy?" The voice came from his friend, a fellow dock worker named Tevin. "Stepping into a public trial like that? You're lucky they didn't break your jaw." Jonas didn't respond. Tevin sighed and sat beside him. "She was just another alien, man, not our fight." "She wasn't nothing. Jonas said softly. She was someone. Tevan stared at him. You don't even know who she is. Jonas turned his eyes back to the horizon. I don't need to. Valari Tassen sat alone in the lower quarters of the elder's house, where disgraced voices were kept quiet and out of sight. Her once golden robe had been cut at the sleeves, a symbol of shame. The pain from her knees had faded, but the memory hadn't. A human, a stranger, had stood for her without knowing why. She didn't remember his name, if she ever heard it at all. But she remembered the way he spoke. The way his eyes didn't ask who she was, only how she was. No one had asked her that in weeks, not since the day she spoke up, and was thrown down. The next morning Jonas returned to the plaza, not the center, but near the fountains. He brought a small packet of dry bread and sat quietly on the edge. He didn't expect to see her again. He just wanted to be nearby. Just in case. Half an hour passed. Then soft footsteps. He turned. And there she was, eyes cautious, voice quiet. You shouldn't be here. Jonas stood slowly. Didn't plan to stay long. She tilted her head. They might punish you again. He smiled faintly. I'm not from here. They can't take much I care about. She looked at the dry bread in his hand, then said, May I sit? He blinked. Of course. They sat beside the fountain. Two strangers. One silence. Then she spoke. My name is Valari Tassen. He nodded. Jonas Cade. You work the docks? Yeah, engines, hull work, sometimes heavy lifting. She looked down. And still you stopped them. I didn't stop them. I just stood up. That's more than anyone else. She didn't sound angry. Just tired. So tired. You were punished for truth, he said. I was punished for speaking it too soon, she replied. Or maybe too loud. She paused. My brother tried too. He vanished a year ago. They said he left. I don't believe them. Jonas leaned back. You think they silenced him? She nodded. I spoke to finish his words. He looked at her. Then you didn't fall. You rose. She smiled. Just barely. I thought I broke that day. You didn't. You bent the air. They sat until the light faded. As she stood, she asked, Why did you really do it? He didn't speak for a moment then. Because if I had stayed quiet, I wouldn't be able to look at myself again. Valari looked at him, not like a savior, not like a hero, but like someone equal. She offered a small bow, not of status, but of thanks, and said, Next time I speak, I hope it's because you reminded me I still have a voice. Then she walked, away, slow and steady, and Jonas, watching her go, whispered to himself, You were never the one who needed reminding. She had nothing left. He gave her a voice. Valari Tassen woke before sunrise. No servants, no warm tea, no mirror, just silence and dust and the memory of shame. She had no title now, no voice in the council, no family who dared speak her name, only whispers in the halls and locked doors behind her. But outside in the open city someone had seen her, not as a disgrace, not as a mistake, but as a person, a human, a dock worker, a stranger named Jonas Cade. And somehow, that meant more than all the silence in the palace. Jonas woke to the sound of steel tools clanging in the shipyard. His job started early. Repairs, pressure lines, sensor rewiring. But today, his thoughts weren't on engines. They were on her, Valari, the girl who had knelt with blood on her knees and dignity still in her eyes. He couldn't forget her voice, not because it was loud, but because it was still strong when the whole city wanted her silent. And now, he wanted to help her say something the city couldn't ignore. Later that afternoon, Valari walked into the repair yard. No one noticed her, at first, until Jonas stepped out of the shadows, wiping his hands on a cloth. You came. I said I would. She held a small case in her hands. I found something. From my brother. Jonas looked at her. She opened the case. Inside a data crystal. This was hidden in his study, she said. Encrypted, but I cracked part of it. Jonas took the crystal and plugged it into a reader. The screen lit up, a list of names, projects, coordinates, and voice logs one played automatically. The children are being sent to Zone 9, no masks, no protection. They won't last long. The elders know. They say nothing. Jonas stared at the screen. Your brother tried to expose this? Valari nodded. He died for it. Or vanished. Either way, they didn't want this to be heard. Jonas looked her in the eyes. Then let's make sure it is. They met at night, in an abandoned signal tower on the edge of the city. Jonas rerouted a comm link. Valari prepped the files. They didn't have a network. They had something stronger. A message. Jonas handed her the mic. You ready? She took a shaky breath, then nodded and spoke. My name is Valari Tisen. You know me as a disgrace, a traitor, a liar. But I am none of those things. I am the sister of Yel Tisen, who vanished for telling the truth. I am the voice he left behind. And I am not afraid anymore. The council hides suffering. They trade silence for comfort. But I will not be silent, because one man stood for me when no one else did. And now I remember who I am. I am still here, and so is the truth. Jonas sent the transmission to 20 terminals across the city, then smashed the console. No trail, no signal bounce, just impact. By morning her voice had spread, not on the official channels, but on backdoors, worker feeds, low-market comms. The people heard, and something inside them shifted. Guards arrived at Jonas's bunkhouse. He was gone. Valari had already warned him. They met in a quiet alley. She looked scared, but not of the guards, of losing momentum. They'll erase this, she whispered. Jonas handed her a second crystal. Then we do it again. She looked at it, then him. You gave me a voice, she said. He shook his head. No, I just turned up the volume, and she smiled. For the first time in weeks, she smiled like someone who still had a future. They called him a liar. Then she spoke his name. The council chambers glowed with polished crystal and quiet power. 10 elders sat in a half-circle, their faces calm, their eyes sharp. In front of them stood a projection screen playing a looped message. One man stood for me when no one else did, and now I remember who I am. The voice was Valari Tisen's. The data was real. The records were damning, and they were furious, but they didn't show it. Not yet. He's human, one elder said. Dock labor, disposable. Outworlders always bring trouble, said another. We let them in. They infect our silence. Her brother's records should have been destroyed, hissed the third. They all turned to the High Elder. He raised his hand for quiet. Bring them both in. Publicly. Deny it all. Shame them again. And if they resist, then we do what we've always done, he said. Erase. That evening, a message spread through the outer zones. A hearing had been called. The disgraced diplomat Valari Tisen was to answer for her misuse of forbidden records in front of all citizens. They hoped to humiliate her again. They expected her to tremble, but they forgot what had changed. This time she wasn't walking. In alone. Jonas stood in the shadows behind the crowd, head low, coat dusty. The plaza was full again, just like the first time. But this time, no one laughed. No one spat. They waited. Valari stepped into the light. Her robes were simple, her hands steady. But her voice, when it came, was like fire. You asked for my confession, she said. Very well. She pulled out the crystal. I confess that I did not lie. The council shifted. I confess that I believed a human's courage meant more than your silence, the crowd whispered. And I confess that the man you all called an outsider is the only reason I still stand here today. Then she raised her voice. His name is Jonas Cade. The plaza gasped. The council snapped. The high elder stood. That name has no place in our records. But it was too late, because someone in the crowd shouted, "He saved her." Then another. "He stood when we did nothing." And then, "Jonas Cade speaks truth." Reed stepped out of the crowd. No armor, no weapons, just his name. He walked to her side, took her hand, and the council fell silent. Not because they agreed, but because they saw something stronger than fear. A bond made in blood and truth. Not law, not titles. Respect. "You are interfering." "Again?" the high elder warned. Jonas nodded. "I know. You were not called. I called myself." Valari smiled and said, and I answered. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just stood, because they knew what was happening. A moment. A shift. One that no council could bury. Later that night, guards surrounded the worker zones, but no one turned Jonas in. Because now, he wasn't a stranger. He was the name whispered between broken machines and silent rooms. The human who wouldn't walk away. And Valari? She wasn't a disgrace anymore. She was the voice they'd tried to crush, and now she echoed everywhere. She faced the crowd alone until he took her hand. The city square was full again, not for punishment, not for ceremony, for judgment. Valari Thyssen had been summoned by the ruling council for the third time. This time they called it a trial. But everyone knew what it was, a warning. One last attempt to break her spirit in public. Guards stood at every corner. The banners of law waved high. The sun burned low behind the towers, and across the stone floor of the square stood a single chair, facing thousands, waiting for her. Valari stepped into view with no escort, no robe, no crown, no fear. But her steps slowed as she reached the chair. People whispered. She came alone. "Where is the human?" "She's stronger than they thought." She sat in silence, straight-backed, hands on her lap. She didn't bow, didn't flinch, but her heart raced, because even now, a part of her wondered if anyone would stand with her this time. From the edge of the crowd, Jonas Cade watched. He had no official place here, no name on the lists. The council had made it clear he was not welcome, but that had never stopped him before, and it wouldn't stop him now. He looked at the guards, at the citizens, at her. She looked smaller today, not weak, just tired, still unbroken, still alone, but she didn't have to be, not anymore. So he stepped forward, one step, then two. A guard turned, raised his hand. Jonas didn't stop. The crowd noticed. Gasps, pointing. The murmurs rose again. "He's here. He's walking into the square. They'll arrest him." No. Wait. Because no one moved to stop him. Not this time. Not after everything they had seen. Not after all the truths already released. Jonas reached the platform. Valari didn't turn to him. She was still staring ahead, calm and still. But when he reached out, she took his hand, and the crowd, thousands of them, went silent, not in shock, in recognition. The high elder rose. "Remove him," he said coldly. A single guard stepped forward, but another placed a hand on his arm. "Sir, perhaps we should listen." The elder froze. "Listen?" he snapped. "To what?" "To them," the younger guard said, nodding toward the crowd, because in the square others were moving too. Valari's old classmates, her brother's friends, dock workers, healers, teachers. One by one they stepped forward, not speaking, not yelling, just standing. Like Jonas had that first day. No banners, no chants, just presence. Silent, strong, undeniable. Valari stood, still holding Jonas's hand, and she spoke, her voice low, steady, unshaken. You wanted me alone. You hoped I would crumble, but I'm not alone. You told the people I was dangerous, but I only told them the truth. You said my bond with a human was shameful, but he stood for me when you would not. She looked across the crowd. And now the people stand too. Not for me, for justice. The council said nothing. What could they say? They had lost control, not with violence, with honor, with truth, and with one hand held in open defiance. Later that evening, no arrests were made, no sentence was announced, no declaration of guilt or innocence. The council simply walked away, and the people stayed. Some wept. Some embraced. Many simply sat down in the square and breathed for the first time in years, because something had changed, something they couldn't name. But they felt it, like light cracking through a heavy door. The council ordered silence, but the people chose her. The next morning, the banners of the council were still flying, but fewer eyes looked up. The square was quiet, but not empty. People were sweeping, planting flowers, cleaning the space where Valari had stood with Jonas. Not because they were ordered to, because they wanted to, because something in them had changed. Inside the central tower, the elders sat in shadow. "What do we do now?" one asked. Another replied, "We wait. The attention will fade. It always does." But the high elder said nothing. He looked out the window and saw something that made his jaw tighten. A young child, Valari's old student, was writing her name, in chalk on the wall, not as a curse, as a symbol, and then, just beneath it, the word truth. In the market district, a merchant gave out bread stamped with a small V on the side. No charge, no words, just a quiet gesture, a nod of support, ND. The factory's workers wore pins made from scrap metal, small rings worn over the heart. They didn't speak about it. They didn't ask permission, they just did it. Because truth didn't belong to the council anymore. It belonged to the streets, to the people, to her. Valari didn't want a crowd. She didn't ask for praise. But when she stepped into the square again, she found hundreds already there, waiting, not to watch her suffer, but to hear her speak. Jonas walked beside her as always, still quiet, still steady. Her voice rose, not loud, not angry, clear. "You were told to forget me, but you remembered. You were told to fear me, but you stood closer. I was told to be silent, but now I speak with you." The crowd listened, because they remembered the day she bled alone, and the day one human stepped forward. And now, they stepped forward too. The council tried one more time to stop her. An official notice was delivered to her quarters. "Cease public appearances. Return to approved housing. You are not authorized to speak for others." She burned the letter, then handed the ashes to a child to throw into the wind. Jonas watched as more and more came to stand with her. Farmers, street sweepers, even a few quiet guards. He didn't say much. He never did. But one evening under the stars, he finally asked, "Why do you keep doing this?" Valari looked up at him. "Because they tried to erase me, and I want others to know. They can't be erased either." She paused, then added, "And because you showed me how to stand again." He smiled. "You didn't need me." She shook, her head gently. "I needed someone who believed I still mattered. You were the first." Days passed, then weeks. The council stopped sending orders, because no one followed them anymore, and when they called for a formal silence day, asking citizens to stay home and protest, the people flooded the streets instead, and stood in complete silence, not in fear, in unity, holding hands, side by side, for Valari, for truth, for each other. In a quiet garden beyond the old court, Jonas sat beside her, watching the sun rise. "Are you Wang?" "No, they can't touch you anymore," he said. She nodded. "But that was never the point." "What was?" She smiled. "To make sure no one else has to kneel again the way I did." He looked at her, So calm now. So sure, not because she won a title, but because she earned something stronger, the voice of a people, and the quiet loyalty of a man who never let go. She had no title, but he gave her something greater. The banners were taken down, not by force, not by war, by hands, by people, quietly, one by one. Valerie Toussaint didn't ask for that. She never asked for a movement, never asked to be remembered. She had only wanted to speak the truth. But now when she walked the streets, people bowed, not because they had to, because they were grateful. The council remained silent. Some resigned, some disappeared, some pretended. They never tried to break her. But none of them could take away what had already happened. The people had chosen her, without vote, without crown, with action. They cleaned her old school, painted her name on the front gate. They planted flowers near the plaza where she once fell, and in the city records, someone quietly edited her status. Citizen, voice of the people. No title, just truth. Jonas Cade stood beside her the day she returned to the place she'd been shamed. The stone floor still carried faint marks, but now it held something else. A small sculpture of her, not tall, not royal, just her, kneeling, rising, holding a stranger's hand. No face carved on the human, no name, just a simple plaque. We remember when someone stood. That evening, the city held a quiet gathering, not a parade, just a fire circle. Stories were shared, food passed around, no cameras, no politics, just warmth. Jonas sat beside Valerie, watching the stars. She held a cup of fruit tea. He held nothing, but her hand. "You could go home, you know," she said softly. "Back to earth. Start fresh." "This is fresh," he said. She smiled. "You stayed longer than anyone else ever has." "I didn't stay for them," he said. She turned toward him. "Then for who?" He looked her in the eyes. "For you." She didn't speak right away, then gently placed her forehead against his, a sign of deep connection in her culture, and whispered, "They took my title, but you gave me something greater. A reason to rise, a reason to keep speaking, a reason to hope." The next morning, the first statue of a human was placed in a Valerie public square. Not because he led armies, not because he built machines, because when everyone turned away from a broken girl on the ground, he stepped forward and said that this isn't right. That was all it took. One voice, one hand, one choice, to change a world. In time, Valerie would help lead a peaceful coalition. She never claimed power. She never ran for office. But whenever people gathered to speak for change, they invited her, and Jonas, he never left her side. He never wanted to, because when he stood that first day, he didn't know her name, but he knew what was right. And in the end, that was all that mattered. She had no title left, but one man gave her something greater, the courage to rise and the strength to speak for 1,000 more.